The day you stop explaining yourself, there is an almost imperceptible moment when you begin to disappear from yourself. It does not happen when someone rejects you. It does not happen when someone criticizes you. It happens a few seconds earlier, when you sense that you are about to be misunderstood and rush to explain who you are. You choose the right words. You rearrange the facts. You soften what you feel. You try to prove that you meant no harm, that there is a reason for your decision, that you are still worthy of affection, respect, and understanding. As you speak, you believe you are defending the truth, but somewhere deeper, you are negotiating for the right to exist without the other person's permission. You know the scene. Someone disapproves of a decision you made, and an entire speech immediately forms inside you. You explain why you left, why you stayed, why you said no, why you changed, why you did not answer, why you no longer accept what you once tolerated. The conversation ends, but the trial continues in your mind. You revisit every sentence. You imagine better answers. You build a defense for a courtroom that may no longer be in session. Your body has left the room. Your mind is still standing before the judge. The problem is not explanation itself. Some explanations are acts of care, responsibility, and respect. The problem begins when you do not merely offer an explanation, you offer yourself as evidence. When your sense of worth depends on someone recognizing your intentions. When peace arrives only after the other person says, "Now I understand you." In that moment, your identity stops belonging entirely to you. It becomes a verdict delivered by someone else. This is where Carl Jung's psychology becomes uncomfortably precise. Jung understood that we do not present everything we are to the world. We develop a persona, a social face that allows us to participate, belong, work, love, and be accepted. The persona is not a lie, it is necessary. The danger begins when we identify with it so completely that we can no longer tell where adaptation ends and self-betrayal begins. Then every sign of disapproval feels like a threat, not because someone questioned one of your choices, but because they touched the mask you learned to confuse with your identity. For years, perhaps you called this politeness, patience, or maturity. Perhaps you believed that good people explain everything, prevent conflict, and keep everyone comfortable. But there is a difference between acting with consideration and asking permission to be who you are. That difference rarely appears in the words themselves. It appears in what remains afterward. A healthy explanation creates clarity. A compulsive justification leaves exhaustion. One brings two people closer. The other abandons you in front of them. And one day, after repeating that abandonment enough times, something changes. You hear yourself beginning another defense and realize that you do not want to finish the sentence. Not because you have become cold, not because you have stopped loving, but because you finally understand the price of convincing everyone else. To preserve the image of an acceptable person, you have been rejecting the one person whose acceptance could truly transform your life, yourself. The need to justify yourself is often much older than the present conversation. Perhaps you learned that affection could be withdrawn when you disappointed someone. Perhaps you were the child who could read the atmosphere before anyone spoke, the tightened face, the prolonged silence, the change in tone. You learned to detect discomfort and alter yourself before the bond could be threatened. For a dependent child, this may have been emotional survival. It was less frightening to believe something was wrong with you than to see a caregiver as unable to provide safety. If I become quieter, more useful, less difficult, perhaps love will return. If I explain myself well enough, perhaps they will not be angry. If I prove that I am good, perhaps they will not leave. The strategy survives the circumstances that created it. The child grows up, the old alarm keeps working. This is why a small criticism can produce an enormous reaction. Someone makes a brief comment, but your body does not receive an opinion. It receives a threat of exclusion. So you select arguments, anticipate accusations, and try to manage the image of you inside another person's mind. It is impossible work. You have no access to that place. Still, you spend hours trying to control it. This is one of the most sophisticated prisons we build, living as the manager of other people's perceptions. You regulate your tone so you will not seem aggressive. You minimize your achievements so you will not seem arrogant. You hide your needs so you will not seem selfish. You tolerate intrusion so you will not seem ungrateful. And when you finally set a boundary, you cannot simply state it. You produce an entire emotional document filled with background, qualifications, disclaimers, and silent requests for absolution. The persona has begun to occupy too much space. What was meant to be clothing for moving through the world has become a second skin you are afraid to remove. You no longer ask, "Is this true for me?" You ask, "How will this be interpreted?" You no longer decide from your center. You decide in front of an imaginary audience. Even when you convince someone, the relief does not last. Every new explanation offers the hope of avoiding conflict, but reinforces the belief that you are safe only when you are understood. Here is the turning point. Being understood is a gift. It is not a requirement for your truth to exist. Two people can look at the same decision and see entirely different stories. You say no because you have reached your limit. Someone else experiences that limit as rejection. You step away to protect your health. They call it selfishness. You change direction because you no longer recognize your own life. Someone calls you unstable. You can offer context, but you cannot force anyone to abandon a story that protects their interests. Some people are not trying to understand you. They are trying to restore the version of you that was convenient for them. That is why certain explanations never work. You assume the problem is a lack of information, so you offer more details. But information is not the real issue. Your change has altered the balance of the relationship. When you were always available, someone had unrestricted access to your time. When you tolerated invasive comments, someone had a place to unload their discomfort. When you apologized for having feelings, everyone else remained free from examining how they treated you. Your boundary interrupts that arrangement. No elegant explanation can make the loss feel pleasant to someone who benefited from your lack of limits. This is where the shadow enters. For Jung, the shadow contains aspects of the personality that the conscious ego represses, denies, or projects. But it does not hold only cruelty. Often it holds the strength you had to exile in order to be accepted. The aggression you fear may contain protection. The selfishness you condemn may contain self-respect. The coldness you dread may be discernment. If your identity rests on being pleasant and available, saying no will confront you with parts of yourself you were taught to reject. Guilt appears because the boundary threatens more than the relationship. It threatens your image of yourself. Who am I if I do not resolve everyone's discomfort? Who am I if someone believes I am a bad person? Who am I when I can no longer prove my goodness? The answer does not arrive immediately. You remain silent and feel as though you have committed an act of violence. The other person accuses you of changing. And you have changed, but not as they imagine. You have not lost your heart. You have lost the willingness to use it against yourself. This is where many people retreat. They confuse guilt with wrongdoing. But guilt is not always the voice of conscience. Sometimes it is the echo of an old rule being broken. If you spent 20 years learning that saying no is dangerous, your first no will feel less like freedom than fear. Freedom comes later, when your inner system discovers that the world did not end. Notice what happens when you do not justify yourself. Silence reveals what explanation once concealed. It reveals who can respect a decision without demanding full access to your inner life. It reveals who accepts your boundaries only after approving them. It reveals who wants dialogue and who wants control. Above all, it reveals your own anxiety. Without the speech of self-defense, you must remain for a few moments beside the possibility of being misunderstood. That ability to remain is a form of maturity. It is not indifference to truth. It is the recognition that your responsibility has limits. You are responsible for speaking honestly, repairing real harm, listening to legitimate criticism, and reconsidering your choices when necessary. You are not responsible for producing a favorable interpretation of yourself in every mind. The first responsibility requires a character. The second requires omnipotence. Many people spend their lives searching for a sentence so perfect that no one will be offended, a boundary so gentle that no one will be disappointed, a decision so thoroughly justified that no one can question it. But every honest choice excludes something. Saying yes to one path means refusing another. Protecting a value may frustrate an expectation. Growth changes silent agreements. The cost appears slowly. You go where you did not want to go, remain in conversations that hurt you, and laugh at remarks that diminish you. You say, maybe, when you mean no. It's fine when it is not, and I understand when you are simply exhausted. Eventually, when someone asks what you want, you search for the answer in their face. This distance from yourself can feel like peace because it reduces external conflict. But the conflict does not disappear. It changes address. The anger you do not express becomes resentment. The sadness you minimize becomes numbness. The need you abandon returns as a silent demand. You give too much and begin to hate people for accepting what you should never have offered. Then you judge yourself for that anger and repress it too. The shadow grows with everything the persona refuses to let you live. Jung used the term individuation for the lifelong process of becoming a more whole individual, someone increasingly able to recognize and integrate both conscious and unconscious dimensions of the personality. This does not mean becoming isolated, superior, or immune to others. It means no longer living only as a response to external expectations. The aim is not to destroy the persona, but to return it to its proper place. The persona serves life. Life does not serve the mask. Individuation asks, what part of me is speaking now? When you begin a long justification, is it the adult offering useful context, or the child trying to prevent love from disappearing? When you accept something that hurts, is it generosity or fear of being called selfish? When you remain silent, is it serenity or an inability to take a stand? The same action can arise from entirely different places. The truth lies not only in the gesture, but in the force producing it. This awareness changes everything because it restores choice. Before, you believed you had to explain. Now you notice your heart accelerate, your mind rehearse arguments, the urge to send one more message, but you do not act immediately. You allow the discomfort to exist without turning it into obedience. For the first time, the pattern does not decide alone. At first, this pause is small. You delete a paragraph before sending your reply. You say, "This decision matters to me," and stop. Such gestures look simple to those who never purchased belonging through self-abandonment. To those who did, they are quiet revolutions. The other person may react badly. Not every boundary improves a relationship. Some reveal that the relationship could function only in their absence. Some people will call your autonomy arrogance because they were accustomed to your submission. They will say you have become cold because they no longer have immediate access to your emotions. Often, they do not want another explanation. They want back the version of you that could be guided by guilt, and that confused love with permanent availability. Their resistance is not proof that you are wrong. Sometimes it is the old system trying to restore itself. But this does not mean you are always right. Stopping the compulsive need to justify yourself is not the same as declaring yourself innocent of everything. There is a profound difference between autonomy and defensiveness. A defensive person rejects reflection because guilt feels unbearable. An autonomous person can listen, examine the facts, and make repairs without giving someone else command over their identity. They can apologize, change, and still refuse to turn one mistake into a sentence against their entire existence. This distinction protects you from a common trap, using Jung, the shadow, or individuation as sophisticated language for avoiding responsibility. Not every criticism is projection. Not every person's discomfort is manipulation. Not every departure is growth. Sometimes you hurt someone. Sometimes your boundary was expressed with cruelty. Sometimes what you call authenticity is only impulse. Wholeness requires bearing these truths too. The mature question is not, how do I prove that I am a good person? It is, what in this criticism belongs to me? If part of it belongs to you, take it back, not to preserve an image, but to grow. The rest can remain with the person who created it. This is delicate inner work, taking responsibility for what you did without taking responsibility for the identity someone has invented for you. As you learn this, your apologies become smaller and more truthful. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry for everything, I'm terrible," you name what you recognize. "I interrupted you. That was disrespectful. I made a promise and did not keep it." There is no performance of self-destruction and no invitation for the wounded person to comfort you. Responsibility does not require you to destroy yourself as proof that you understand. Your explanations change too. You offer context when context can create connection, not when you are begging for absolution. You speak once, clearly. If the other person misunderstands, you can correct them. If they insist on a distortion because it serves them, you do not enter an endless maze of arguments. Some conversations do not fail for lack of words. They fail for lack of openness. There is grief in seeing how many versions of yourself were built to fit into places too small for you. The strong person who could never ask for help, the calm person who could never show anger, the generous person who could keep nothing for themselves. Each identity offered belonging, but demanded an exile. Integrating the shadow means allowing those exiled parts to return without handing them the throne. Anger becomes the ability to say enough. Vulnerability becomes the courage to ask. Ambition becomes permission to occupy space. Desire becomes direction. The more consciously you hear these forces, the less they must emerge through resentment, explosions, or sabotage. Then something unexpected happens. When you stop explaining yourself compulsively, some relationships become deeper. You speak less, yet you become more known. The old explanations were often a form of editing. You showed people what you believed they could accept. Now you begin to offer something real. A yes that means yes, a no that means no, affection that does not conceal fear, and a boundary that does not require the theater. Emotionally mature people may not agree with all your choices, but they do not erase you in order to disagree. They ask without interrogating and can name their hurt while still recognizing your humanity. With them, explanation becomes free again. You share because you want closeness, not because you fear expulsion. Other relationships grow weaker, sometimes without a dramatic conflict. You stop initiating every contact, mediating every tension, and offering every reconciliation. The silence reveals how much of the bond was sustained by your effort. This hurts because you lose not only a person, but the hope that, if you tried harder, you might finally be chosen without having to earn it. Some goodbyes are not signs of failure, but encounters with reality. You do not need to turn those who leave into villains. Some people can walk beside you only while you remain in the role they understand. Silence then stops being a weapon and becomes space. It is not meant to punish or control. It is the silence of someone who has said what was necessary and refuses to abandon themselves inside an argument with no end. This requires accepting a truth that the ego resists. You will be the villain in stories whose version you may never be able to correct. Someone will remember only the day you left, not the years you tried to stay. Someone will repeat your no and omit all the times you said yes. Someone will describe your boundary and omit what made it necessary. You will not be able to control that. But perhaps control was never the real goal. Perhaps the goal was to belong to yourself, even when you could not direct the narrative. That is a more durable form of freedom. It does not depend on applause or unanimity. It begins when your conscience, after examining what happened honestly, is still able to remain beside you. Remaining beside yourself does not mean closing yourself inside rigid certainty. You stay curious, able to ask whether you were wrong, and open to your impact on others. But you do this from a center. You do not kneel before every opinion or confuse being loved with being approved of at all times. That center is built through small decisions. You wait before responding. You ask for time to think. You do not send a fifth message to clarify what you have already said 4 times. You ask, am I creating understanding or trying to control the reaction? Over time, the body learns a new experience. Disapproval remains uncomfortable, but it no longer feels like annihilation. Someone's expression hardens and you do not immediately alter your truth. Someone steps away and you do not offer yourself in pieces to bring them back. You discover that you can survive the negative image of you that exists in another person's mind. More than survive it, you can remain whole. The persona then becomes useful again. You can be polite without being submissive, diplomatic without being false, flexible without becoming undefined. You can choose what to reveal and to whom without turning privacy into guilt. Not everyone is entitled to your inner world. Intimacy is not a debt owed to anyone who demands an answer. Over-explaining can give intimate information to people who have no intention of treating it with care. Hoping to be understood, you expose wounds and fears. The other person does not become more compassionate, they simply receive a map of where to apply pressure. Transparency without safety is not authenticity, it is exposure. So you choose your witnesses more carefully, people before whom you can say, I don't know yet, and who can hear your story without using it to reduce you. With them, language stops being a defense and becomes an encounter, and you realize that you never truly wanted to explain everything to everyone. You wanted to find a few places where you did not have to prove anything. Perhaps this is one of the deepest parts of individuation, no longer organizing your life around the question, how do I appear? And beginning to organize it around the question, what is true? The first question produces performance, the second produces responsibility. Living truthfully does not mean doing whatever you want. It means bearing the consequences of conscious choices without transferring the blame and without demanding universal agreement. You will lose certain comforts. Over-explaining once gave you a false sense of harmony. When you stop, differences become visible. Conflicts that were postponed rise to the surface. Some conversations become harder, but now the difficulty has ground beneath it. You are present inside it. There can be no real peace when one person must disappear to preserve it, and there is a quiet joy in returning to yourself. It arrives as restored energy. The hours once spent composing defenses come back to you. Your mind grows less crowded with imaginary conversations. That energy returns to your body, your work, your creativity, and reciprocal relationships. Beneath the noise of an internal jury, you begin to recognize your own voice. It may not be a loud voice. It may say only, this is good for me. This hurts me. This is what I want. This I can no longer offer. 4 simple sentences, an entire lifetime spent learning to say them without guilt. The day you stop explaining yourself is not the day fear disappears. It is the day fear no longer has the final word. You will still want to be understood. You will still feel the pain of an unfair interpretation. You will still consider going back to explain one more time. The difference is that someone inside you can now say, "We have already been honest. We do not need to abandon ourselves to obtain a different verdict." Perhaps no one will notice when it happens. There will be no announcement, dramatic rupture, or final speech. You will be looking at a message, an accusation, a disappointed face. You will feel the old mechanism begin. Your mind will gather evidence. Your body will plead for reconciliation at any cost. Then you will breathe and do something that once seemed impossible. You will choose a response that is brief, truthful, and enough. Perhaps you will say, "I understand that you see it that way." Perhaps you will say, "My decision remains the same." Perhaps you will say nothing, and in that silence, for the first time, you will not be trying to defeat the other person. You will be refusing to lose yourself. People will continue telling stories about you. Some will be generous, others will be incomplete. Some will recognize you, others will recognize only the mask you can no longer wear. That belongs to them. What belongs to you is the more difficult task, to look at your light and your shadow, your mistakes and your limits, and not run away. Because maturity is not becoming impossible to judge. It is refusing to build your entire life as a defense against judgment. Perhaps freedom is not being understood by everyone. Perhaps it is knowing that even when someone does not understand you, you no longer need to disappear to make their story easier. You do not need to have the last word. You only need to stop giving other people the right to decide who you are allowed to be.